B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Pesachim Daf Kuf Gimel. We're going to start 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis. Says the Gemara Gufa, Yom Tov shechol liyos achar haShabbos. If the first day of Yom Tov is on a Sunday, which means that Motzei Shabbos marks the end of Shabbos, which would need a Havdalah, and marks the start of Yom Tov, which demands a Kiddush, what do? You have to say Kiddush, you have to say Havdalah. We know that there's also a bracha of Hagofen. Whenever you make Havdalah or Kiddush, you make Hagofen. On Motzei Shabbos, we know there's a bracha of Neir. You make a bracha on the Boirei Ma'orei Ha'esh. And on a regular Motzei Shabbos, you've got Besomim. Over here, Besomim is not going to be mentioned, either as Rashbam says, because the Neshama Yisera of Shabbos doesn't leave us when Motzei Shabbos is Yom Tov, or how Tosfos says that the Neshama Yisera of Shabbos does leave us, but the Yom Tov itself, and the Simcha of Yom Tov, and the Sudas Yom Tov stands in place of the Besomim to help us with the departure of the Neshama Yisera. Either way, Besomim is not in the equation here, but we have these 4 brachas. We have the Yayin, which is the Hagofen. We have the bracha of Mo'ir, which is the Boirei Ma'orei Ha'esh. Then you have the bracha of Kiddush and the bracha of Havdalah. The question is the order. And we're going to have 7 different opinions in the Gemara now. Says the Gemara, Gufa Yom Tov shechol liyos achar haShabbos. Rav Omar Yayin Kiddush Neir Havdalah. That means Rav's opinion, we're going to see that Rav or Shmuel, the first 2 opinions, they will be the most dominant ones. And the Rashbam here says that the truth is that this is really should be a regular Havdalah. But because it's Motzei Shabbos, but because it's also Yom Tov and Kiddush comes into the equation, Kiddush is going to do something to rearrange possibly the brachas. Rav says that you start with the bracha of Yayin. Because Todir v'she'enoi Todir Kodim, the bracha you make the most often is the one that you make first. Then you make Kiddush. We'll soon see why, but Kiddush comes before Havdalah. And then Havdalah, what's left of Havdalah? Boirei Ma'orei Ha'esh, called Neir, and then Havdalah. Why does Rav say that the Kiddush is before Havdalah? Is because Rav says if you make Havdalah first, it looks like you're in a rush to get rid of Shabbos. So you first make Kiddush, and as Rashbam says that the Kiddush is Odif of Havdalah, we prefer first to make Kiddush, and afterwards you make the bracha, which marks the Shabbos leaving us. Shmuel Omar. Shmuel argues fundamentally with Rav. He agrees that you make the first bracha is Yayin because it's the most often made bracha. Todir v'she'enoi Todir Kodim. He then says you do Neir and Havdalah, and only afterwards Kiddush. That means the point of the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel is Kiddush before Havdalah or is Kiddush after Havdalah? And Shmuel says that Kiddush is after Havdalah because always when, we're going to see in the Gemara later that when you have a king that's leaving and a minister that's coming, you first greet the king on his way out, only then do you greet the minister on his way in. And that's Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Omar. Rabbi says, Yayin first is wine. He agrees to Rav and Shmuel that wine is first. Todir v'she'enoi Todir Kodim. And then he says that Havdalah is before Kiddush, which seems to follow, which is what Shmuel says. However, he turns around the Havdalah and the Neir. Because in the same way as we saw with Rav says that you have the Neir is between Kiddush and Havdalah. So Rabbi says we want to have Neir between the Kiddush and Havdalah. So according to Shmuel, for example, you have Havdalah immediately afterwards Kiddush. Rav says no. Rav says you have Kiddush and then Neir followed by Havdalah. We want to make a separation between the Neir and the Havdalah, and between the Kiddush and Havdalah. So Rabbi says that you first make the Hagofen, and then you make Havdalah, because he follows Shmuel in that aspect, and then you have the Neir, and then you make the Kiddush. Levi Omar. Levi says first is Kiddush. He holds like Rav that Kiddush is before Havdalah. And then you have the Neir, and then you have the Yayin, and then you have the Havdalah. Rav, for example, he says that the yayin is first, and then you've got Kiddush, and then Neir, and only right at the end Havdalah. You hardly see that the wine, the broch of the yayin, is going on the Havdalah. Kiddush doesn't really need wine. If you don't have wine, you can make Kiddush on bread. You can't make Havdalah on bread, and there's such a large gap between them. So every Motzah Shabbos, where there's no Kiddush, even though the bracha of Neir is between, and Besomim is between the Yayin and Havdalah, it's okay. But here that you have Kiddush, we've got to put the Yayin, as the bracha of Yayin, as close to the Havdalah as possible. So that's why Levi says you first make Kiddush because Kiddush is before Havdalah, and then you make the bracha of the Neir, and then you make the bracha of Hagofen immediately before the Havdalah. Next opinion, V'Rabbanon Omri, Kiddush. First is Kiddush like Rav. Rav says that Kiddush is before Havdalah, and then you have the Yayin. In order to bring the brach, even though Yayin is Todir, is more often, we want the Yayin to be closer to Havdalah, so we don't do it before Kiddush, we do it after the Kiddush, but we don't mind, according to Rabbanon, it's okay to have the Neir between the Yayin and the Havdalah. Mar Bereider Ravina Omar. First you've got the Neir. Why? Because he says that first and foremost, the first thing that you have pleasure from on Motzah Shabbos is the Neir. Before anything else, you see the light. You want to make a bracha. So first is Neir. Afterwards is Kiddush, because he holds like Rav over Shmuel that Kiddush is before Havdalah. And then, however, he says that you put in order that the Yayin should be close to the Havdalah, in order that the bracha of the Hagofen should be as close as possible to the Havdalah, you do the Yayin after Kiddush, before Havdalah. So first is Neir, is the first thing you have pleasure from, then Kiddush, which is before Havdalah, and then Yayin, so the Yayin should be close to Havdalah, and then Havdalah. Marta Oma Mishmeid Rabbi Yeshua. Marta said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, and he said, and according to the Giras of the Rashi and the Rashbam, it's first is the Neir. That's first and foremost. That, like we just saw now, that's the first thing you have pleasure from. And then you have Havdalah, because he follows Shmuel that says Havdalah is before Kiddush. And then you have the Yayin. In order to separate between the Havdalah and the Kiddush, you put you say Hagofen, and that way, it's not only to separate between the two, but that way it's clear that the bracha of the Hagofen is going also on Kiddush, also on Havdalah. So immediately after Havdalah, you say the Hagofen, and then you make Kiddush. You're putting the Yayin between the Kiddush and Havdalah to show that the bracha of the Yayin is referring to both of them. Those are the opinions of in this topic of the order of making Kiddush with Havdalah on Motzah Shabbos. Sholach le'avur de Shmuel le Rabbi. Father of Shmuel sent to Rabbi, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us our master, Seder Havdalah Yisheich. What is the Seder of the Havdalahs? Even though we've just seen a whole load of opinions now. That's why he asked him, teach us how to make Havdalah on Motzah Shabbos when it's Yom Tov with Kiddush. Sholach le kachom Rabbi Shmuel b'Rabbi Yosi, she'oma mishum oviv. This is what was said in the name of Rabbi Yosi, the father of Rabbi Shmuel. She'oma mishum Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, who said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Neir, and we saw this actually before already, that we had this opinion that Marta said in the name of Reb Yeshua ben Chananya, first Neir, and then Havdalah. Neir first is the one you benefit from first, then Havdalah, because he follows Shmuel that Havdalah is before Kiddush, and then Yayin, in order to show us that the bracha of the Yayin is referring to the Havdalah as well as the Kiddush, and then Kiddush at the end. Omer B'Chananya, Mashal to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, this opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya and Shmuel, who both say that Havdalah is before Kiddush, is a mashal, is analogous, or you can bring a parable to this from a story, Lemelech Sheyotza, a king that's leaving, V'Aparkus, and a minister, or some type of royal figure, Nichnas, is coming in, Melavin es HaMelech, first you greet the king out, V'Acharkach Yotzim Nikras Aparkus, and only afterwards you go and you greet the minister coming in. So too, Shabbos is leaving. Shabbos is compared to the Melech. It's a Gemara in other places that Shabbos is the king. When Shabbos leaves, you greet the Shabbos. You make Havdalah. Once the Shabbos is left, you can then invite Yom Tov in after that with Kiddush. Says the Gemara, what's the what do you do when Motzah Shabbos is Yom Tov, a first day Yom Tov, and you have the bracha of Shechayonu, called Zman. Shechayonu v'kiyimonu v'giyonu la'zman hazeh. So where do you put Zman? Till now we've discussed Yayin and Neir and Havdalah and Kiddush. Where does Shechayonu come in? So Abaya Omar, Yayin, Kiddush, Zman, Neir, Havdalah. Which means that they're following Abaya and Rava. We're about to see they're both following the very first opinion before that we saw, and that is Rav. What did Rav say? Rav said first Yayin, because it's Todir, and then Mo'ir, and then Havdalah. And no, Rav says Kiddush is first, Yayin, Kiddush, Neir, and Havdalah. So Abaya says that you put the Shechayonu straight after Kiddush. Always Shechayonu is not because of the Shabbos going out. Shechayonu is because of the new Yom Tov. So Rav says you make Yayin and then Kiddush immediately after Kiddush, which is, the Kiddush is for the new Yom Tov. You say Shechayonu. And then you do Havdalah. After Kiddush you do Havdalah. So then you do the Neir and the Havdalah. That's called Yayin, Kiddush, Zman, Neir, Havdalah. Rava says no. Rava says that Shechayonu is done right at the end of the whole Kiddush and Havdalah. You say Shechayonu right at the end. Yayin, Kiddush, Neir, Havdalah, and then Zman. V'hilchas Rava, and this is the famous Yak Nahaz that we know, the halachas like Rava, that when a first day Yom Tov is after Shabbos, you do Yayin, Kiddush, Neir, Havdalah, Zman. Continues the Gemara of Huna bar Yehuda, Iklo lebei Rava. Huna bar Yehuda chanced, he was visiting the home of Rava on a regular Motzah Shabbos. Aisule Kamayu, Moir, they brought in front of Rava a candle. Ubasomim, they also brought in front of him some basomim on a regular Motzah Shabbos. Baruch Rava basomim. Rava first made the bracha on basomim, Bereisha, v'hodar Moir, and only afterwards made the bracha on the Boirei Moirei Ha'esh, which is the order that we do it. Omarle. And when Rav Huna saw what Rava was doing, Rav Huna said to Rava, "V'habein b'Shamai ubein b'Hillel Moir Bereisha v'hodar basomim." I've got a Mishnah where the Mishnah seems to say that the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and both agree that Neir is before basomim. And so why are you Rava doing basomim before Neir? Umaihi. Where's this Mishnah? That none we learned in the Mishnah in Brachas. Beis Shammai Oimrim, Beis Shammai say that in the event that you only have one kos and you need to make Havdalah and Birchas Hamazon, what do we do? So Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree that you say Neir first, and they both agree that Havdalah is at the end, is the last bracha. The question is, do you say Birchas Hamazon first, or do you say the Basomim first? So Beis Shammai say Neir Umozoin Basomim v'Havdalah, that Basomim is after Mozoin. Ubeis Hillel Oimrim Neir Basomim Umozoin v'Havdalah, that Basomim is before Birchas Hamazon. But everybody agrees that Neir is first. So why are you Rava doing Basomim first? Only Rava Basrei. So Rava answered to Rav Huna and said, V'Omar, and he said, Zu Divrei Reb Meir. That's an anonymous Mishnah. We know anonymous Mishnayos are Reb Meir. Reb Meir understood that that was the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Aber Reb Yehuda Omer. But we know that Reb Yehuda in the Tosefta argues with Reb Meir, and Reb Yehuda says that the Machlekes is different. He says that they both, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, both agree that Birchas Hamazon is first, because you're chayev Birchas Hamazon before you are chayev Havdalah. And they both agree that Havdalah is at the end. The question is, Neir and Basomim, which is first? Lo nechluku Beis Shammai uBeis Hillel al Hamazon shu betchila, v'al Havdalah shi basoif. Al ma nechluku al Moir v'al Basomim. Beis Shammai omrim Moir v'achar kach Basomim. Beis Shammai say you first do Boirei Moirei Ha'esh and then Basomim. UBeis Hillel omrim Basomim v'achar kach Moir. First you do the bracha of Basomim, and then Boirei Moirei Ha'esh, which is exactly what Rava did, and that's what we also do. Continues the Gemara. V'omar Rabbi Yochanan, Noagu ha'om keBeis Hillel v'alibud Rabbi Yehuda. The custom is to do like Rabbi Yehuda understood Beis Hillel, that you first do Neir and then Basomim. Continues the Gemara. And this is going to be a story in parts. It means it's going to be quite a long incident, this, and the Gemara is going to discuss one by one the various sections of what transpired. Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba iklo lebei Rava. Rabbi Yaakov bar Bar Abba was visiting, he chanced Rava on Shabbos, he arrived there on Shabbos. That's where the story starts. It's going to finish on Motzei Shabbos. But it starts on Shabbos. Chazia, they were eating their meal. In the day, it was a day meal. Chazia de Borich Boiri Priagofen Akasa Kamo. They made a bracha on a first kos. It's a discussion whether it's referring to Kiddush or whether it's referring to a hagofen in the middle of the meal. It's a discussion whether it was a suda shlishis, is there kiddush, is there no kiddush? That's a different discussion. But either way, he saw that he made a hagofen at some point when he drank a first kos during or before the suda, and then afterwards they benched birchas hamazon. V'hodar borich hakasa de birchasa. After birchas hamazon, they made another hagofen, which is what we also do, even though we make a hagofen with kiddush or when we drink in the meal after the Birchas Hamazon, we again say Hagofen on the Kos of Birchas Hamazon. So he made the bracha on the Birchas Hamazon, Kos, V'ishti, and he drank it. Omar le. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rava, Lama lecha kulehai. Why do you have to do all this? Why do you have to make again a Hagofen on the bracha after Birchas Hamazon? Haborich lon mar, my master, you Rava, did you not make a bracha Chod Zimna once earlier on? So Rav is going to give a couple of answers. One is two answers. The first one's going to be challenged. He'll give a different answer. But at this point, Rav answers, Omar le, Ki avinon beresh gelusa. When I used to go to the resh gelusa, hochi of dinon. That's what we would do. That's what everybody did. They would make a bracha on the first kos, and afterwards they get another kos. They would make another hagofen. Omar le. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rava, but the Resh Kelusa is different. Tinuch be Resh Kelusa. We can understand by the Resh Kelusa, the Hochi Ovid, that's what they did. The Sofik Maisilon, Sofik Klei Maisilon, because when he gave you the first cup to drink, you didn't know you were going to get a second cup, so you only had in mind this one cup. He made Hagofen. You afterwards got another cup for Birchas Hamazon. It's like a new cup. You make a new Hagofen. Hocha, but over here in your own home, Hamonach Kosa Kamon. This case of Birchas Hamazon was in front of you. You knew that you were going to say Birchas Hamazon and have a second kos. V'daton ilavei. And when you made the first hagofen, your mind was on the second kos. Why should you have to make a second hagofen? Omar le, Rava answered to Rabbi Yaakov something else. Anoka avdika talmidi de Rav. We followed the disciples of Rav. The Rav Broino Rav Chananel. Talmidi de Rav have, there were two talmidim of Rav Broino and Rav Chananel. And they would have a yosvu besudosa. They were sitting by a meal. And Koi alayu Rabbi Yeva Sava. Rabbi Yeva the elder, he was the shamash, he was serving them. Omer le, Havlon v'nivrach. So he said, let's bench, like what we would say, Rabbi Sai Nevorich, Rabbi Sai Mivelin benchen, for those who say it in Yiddish. They said, that's it, we've decided to close the meal, we're ready to bench. L'seif, then they changed their mind. Omru, and they said, Omru le, afterwards they said to the shamash, the one that was serving them, no, you can, because first they said, that's it, you can stop serving, we're benching. Then they said, actually no, havlon v'nishti, bring us a cup of wine. Omar luhu. So he said to them, Hochi Omar Rav. He said in the name of Rav, Kiven da Amritu, since you said, havlon v'nivrech, come, let's bench. Itzera l'chule mishti, from that point on, you're not allowed to drink anymore, because it's already as if you've ceased your original bracha, your original intentions. That's it now. The original hagofen is over. And now you're not allowed to drink anymore until you bench, and then you make another hagofen. Why you have to bench and they couldn't just make a new hagofen, that's a discussion in Tosfos and Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. We don't need to go into that now. But over here, Rashi and Rashbam, over here in other places, Rashi says differently, but Rashi here seems to say that you have to first bench and then you can make a new hagofen. My tama, what's the reason? Da'asichu da'taichu, because your mind has left, you've been distracted yourself from the original hagofen, and therefore you have to make a new hagofen. So that's what Rava told Rabbi Yaakov. The reason that I made a bracha is because once you make Birchas Hamazon is the end of any previous bracha Rishona. You have to make a new bracha Rishona, and that's how Rava explained to Rabbi Yaakov why he made the bracha of hagofen after Birchas Hamazon. Continues the Gemara. Ameimer Marzutra v'Rav Ashi. Three Ameiroim, Ameimer Marzutra and Rav Ashi have a yasu b'suda, so they were sitting for a regular meal on a regular weekday. V'koi alayu Reb Acha b'rei Rava. Reb Acha b'rei Rava came to them. Ameimer Borich al kol kasa v'kasa. Every cup of wine that was given to a meimer, he would make a new agofen. Umar Zutra, Borich hakasa kamo v'kasa basro. Mar Zutra, he made the bracha as we saw before with Rava. He made the bracha on the first kais and did not make a bracha with all the other kaises that he was drinking. However, the last kais, the one after Birchas Hamazon, there he made another agofen. Rav Ashi argued and said no. Borich hakasa kamo. He made a bracha on the very first cup of wine. V'sulei borich. He didn't make another agofen. That means even the kais, which is what Rabbi Yaakov assumed when he was challenging Rava, that once you made your agofen, even though you've benched in between the cup after the Birchas Hamazon, does not need a new agofen. Omalu Rav Acher bar Rava. Rav Acher bar Rava was watching this, and he wasn't understanding. You have 3 Amoraim here, each one did something else. And none command nevered. Who should we follow? So now at least they're going to explain themselves, and then they'll know why they did what they did. Ameimer said, Nimlochana. The reason I made the bracha on every kais, really I agree with, says Ameimer, I agree with Mar Zutra, that the first hagofen could have pattered all the other wine. But I personally, every time I drink, I only have in mind 1 cup. That's it. And then I reconsider every time I have a new cup. So every time I have another cup, I reconsider. A reconsider means a new bracha. Nimlochano. Umar Zutra says no. Anod of the Talmidei de Rav. I followed like we saw before with the Talmidei de Rav. You make 1 bracha at the beginning until Birchas Hamazon. You don't need another kais. Birchas Hamazon is a hefsek, and after Birchas Hamazon you need to have another hagofen. Sorry, that means he follows the Talmidei de Rav that for 1 hagofen, all the other kaisos don't need another hagofen. Rav Ashi says, less hilchas Talmidei de Rav. I don't agree with what happened there with the Talmidim of Rav. I believe, says Rav Ashi, that I have proof that Rav himself held that the fact that I benched is not called a hefsek, and you don't need to make another hagofen on the cup after Birchas Hamazon. Coming back to our topic that we're in initially, if you have Motzah Shabbos, which is Yom Tov, where you make yayin, you first make hagofen, says Rav, Omar Rav, first you make hagofen, then you make kiddush, and then you say neir, and then you say havdalah. You don't make another bracha of hagofen after kiddush before havdalah, even though you said hagofen before kiddush, and then you interrupted with saying kiddush, which is another bracha. If you interrupted, and nonetheless, you make havdalah, you don't need to make a new hagofen. And the same way that the kiddush doesn't interrupt between the hagofen and the havdalah, so too Birchas Hamazon doesn't interrupt between the hagofen you made on a kais before and the kais afterwards. That is what Rav Ashi maintained. But the Gemara says, V'loihi, he's not right. Why? Because Rav indeed holds, like the Talmidei de Rav, that Birchas Hamazon is a hefsek. However, it's not a contradiction to what he says, Yain Kiddush Neir Havdalah. Because Hasam, in the case of a Suda, Birchas Hamazon, Okar Daite Mimishtayo. By making Birchas Hamazon, you're clearly uprooting any intentions of drinking anymore in this meal. You're saying, that's it, my meal is finished. And therefore, the hagofen you made at the beginning is now interrupted. You have to make a new hagofen after Birchas Hamazon. But hocha, in the case of Kiddush and Havdalah, lo yokar daite mi mishtaya. On the contrary, you haven't yet drunk at all. You made hagofen, you haven't even drunk yet. You've just made the bracha of Kiddush. Of course, you still have in mind to drink. So you say the bracha of Neir, and then Havdalah, and then you drink. And therefore, you cannot compare the 2 opinions of Rav, and therefore the Talmidim of Rav are right. As Ameimar and Mar Zutra held, that you make 1 hagofen at the beginning, unless you explicitly, like we saw with Ameimar, unless you explicitly had in mind just to drink 1 cup, you have in mind 1 hagofen, all the kaisos until Birchas Hamazon. Birchas Hamazon is Hesech Hadas. After Birchas Hamazon, you make another hagofen. Continues the Gemara, and now we're continuing our incident with Rabbi Yaakov and Rava. We saw in Omid Aleph that Rabbi Yaakov was visiting Rava, and he saw him make 1 bracha on the first cup of wine and another bracha after Birchas Hamazon. He questioned him, etc. And now what happened was, okay, they made Birchas Hamazon, and they made hagofen, they drank the wine. At some point, it came to Havdalah. Kimote leHavdalah. Kom Shamei, the Shamash, the servant, the one that was serving them, stood up, V'adlik avuka, and he kindled an avuka, which is a large flame, mishraga, from a smaller flame, from a candle. Omalei. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rava, After Havdalah, when they finished Havdalah, Rabbi Yaakov said to Rava, Lama lacha kulahai, why was that necessary? You had a candle. Why did your shamash have to kindle from a candle to make a larger flame, an avuka? Homancha shraga. He's got a candle. That should have been enough to make a bracha of Bayre Meire Oish. Omalei, so Rava answered to Rabbi Yaakov, Sham'a midaita denafsheika ovid, my servant, he did it on his own accord. I didn't tell him to do that. Omarlei, Rav Yaakov then challenged Rava and said, Iloi shemir le minei demar, had this shamash not heard from you, Rava, that that's the right thing to do, lo yava ovid, he wouldn't have done it. Omarlei, so Rava now explained, and the Mefarshim discuss why Rava didn't answer initially the whole truth. But now Rava said to Rabbi Yaakov, I'll explain it to you. Lo sovar leimar, do you, Rabbi Yaakov, not hold that avuka la'avdola mitzvah min hamuvchar, that it's a mitzvah to have a large candle, one made of a number of flames, a number of wicks, to use that for the Havdalah candle? It's true that we had a single candle with a single wick, but everybody knows that you're supposed to make Havdalah on a larger flame with a number of wicks, and that is what my servant did. Posach v'omar, and the continuation was, or saying Rabbi Yaakov asked Rava after Havdalah about this incident with the candle, but what nusach, what formula of Havdalah did Rava use? Posach v'omar, and Rava said the following bracha of Havdalah, but exactly the nusach of Rava's Havdalah we're going to learn in the next shiur. It's going to take us into the next sugya.